You're listening to episode number 73 of the Keto Diet Podcast. Today's episode is explicit, so if you are sensitive to swear words or you have little ones around, perhaps skip this episode or wait until you are solo. Today we're chatting about the connection between rules and binging, what your body does when you stop restricting your food, the role of intuitive eating on binging, weight as a proxy for health, and so much more. So stay tuned. Hey, I'm Leanne from healthfulpursuit.com, and this is the Keto Diet Podcast. Keto is a low-carb, high-fat diet where we're switching from a sugar-burning state to becoming fat-burning machines. Starting keto and maintaining it long-term can be quite a challenge if you don't feel supported. My 60-day program, the Keto Bundle, provides you with clear step-by-step how-to on successfully adapting to a ketogenic diet, avoiding common ketogenic struggles, and healing your body completely and fully with a ketogenic diet. Go to healthfulpursuit.com/bundle and use the coupon code podcast, all in caps, no spaces, to get 10% off your order, exclusive for podcast listeners only. Now, let's get this party started. Hey guys, happy Sunday. The show notes and full transcript for today's episode can be found at healthfulpursuit.com/podcast/E73. The transcript is added to the post about 3 to 5 days following the initial air date of this episode. And let's hear from one of our awesome partners. Whether I'm on the go or at home in the RV, a good keto snack goes far beyond whether or not it fits my macros. I love snacking on foods that I know do right by my body, and that's why I love Paleo Valley grass-fed beef sticks. Each keto-friendly stick contains 1 billion probiotic CFUs to keep my gut healthy and happy, plus support my immune system. They come in a variety of awesome flavors. My personal favorite is summer sausage. Paleo Valley is offering 20% off their fermented beef stick snacks to listeners of the Keto Diet Podcast. Just head on over to paleovalley.com/keto to get your instant 20% off. Unsure of the link? Simply check out the show notes of today's episode to get all the details. I got one announcement today, and that is that for the last 4 years, I've been working on something super exclusive. It's almost like a secret project that's been marinating for a really long time, and I keep going back to it and playing around with it and then letting it sit for a couple of weeks and then going back to it. And after the book launch, The Keto Diet, I finally had time to sit down and really build this thing up. And I've partnered with a fantastic naturopathic doctor, one of my really close friends, and really bring this program together with not only the knowledge I know about the ketogenic diet, but also the medical scientific pieces that I don't focus on as much in my practice. So what does this mean for you? I'll be launching this program soon-ish, and if you want to know more about it, you can head on over to healthfulpursuit.com/member to sign up to be one of the first to know more when it becomes available. Today's guest is Isabel Foxen. She's a creator of Stop Fighting Food, a free video training program for women who want to stop feeling crazy around food. After years of trying to overcome emotional eating, binge eating, and chronic weight cycling through traditional and alternative approaches, Isabel discovered some radical new ways to get women over their food issues once and for all, not just by shifting the mindsets of individuals, but by challenging the dominant diet culture as a whole. Her writing and free guide, How to Not Eat Cake, can be found at www.isabelfoxenduke.com, and you can watch her free video training series at stopfightingfood.com. So today we're going to be chatting all about solving the binging problem. And this is something that I've had to go through personally over many, many years of work. And I really struggled because, as Isabel will mention, I always thought the problem was with the binging, when in actuality, it was the problem with the rules I set around my body, my diet, just everything that resulted in binging. And that's really where we're going to delve in deep today. It's such an honor to have Isabel on the show, because when I was going through this work of trying to figure out how to not be crazy around food, she played such a key role in my ability to overcome the craziness that was my life when all I cared about was food and my body and thinness and being healthy and all of those things. So It's really nice to have her on the show so that we can share her message to you guys who may not be familiar with her work yet. So without further ado, let's cut over to the interview. The Keto Diet Podcast, including show notes and links, provides information in respect to healthy living, recipes, nutrition, and diet, and is intended for informational purposes only. The information provided is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor is it to be construed as such. We cannot guarantee that the information provided on the Keto Diet Podcast reflects the most up-to-date medical research. Information is provided without any representations or warranties of any kind. Please consult a qualified physician for medical advice and always seek the advice of a qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your health and nutrition program. Hey Isabel, how's it going?
Hi, it's good. How are you doing?
I'm so great, and I'm just so honored that you're on the podcast. Like I was saying before we started recording, you are just amazing, and I'm so honored that we can chat today.
Yay! Oh, I'm so glad to hear it. It's a pleasure to be here. Let's do this.
Yeah. Okay. So for listeners that may not be familiar with your work, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
All right, cool. So, I, like so many women out there, have been dieting for I had been dieting for about as long as I could remember, starting from a very, very, very young age. I actually had an unusually early age that I started dieting. I was put on my first diet by my pediatrician when I was 3 years old. And you've probably even heard me say that before on interviews, is kind of where my story begins, the drama of Isabel's diet, history. And as a result, right, I, was sort of always constantly, again, from as long back from as far back as I can remember, just constantly just trying to control my size, right? Constantly thinking there was something wrong with my body, constantly feeling like, I was too big, whatever that meant, because, I'd been told literally as a very, very small child, she's a little high on the baby BMI scale. My poor parents, doing their sort of what they thought was ultimate due diligence in parenthood. Of course, we're going to put her on the broccoli and skim milk diet and make sure our baby is thin enough, which sounds crazy in retrospect, but this is actually what happened to me, and this is happening all of the time, right? I mean, I think it's actually gotten worse in the past 20 years as there's been so much confusion about weight and health, and how weight has sort of become this proxy for health, right? This weight has become the sort of ultimate indicator of health, which historically it was not. This is sort of a relatively new concept that, thinness and health are the same thing. So just again, grew up, and I think everyone's stories are a little bit different, but most women at some point in their lives, and I was no different, got the message that my body wasn't okay, and that I needed to try to become as thin as I possibly could. And so my entire young adult, my entire childhood, basically into my teen years through the beginning of college, was just spent constantly trying to lose weight at any cost, right? Just constantly trying to figure out what's the next thing that's going to make me thin? What's the next magical unicorn solution that's going to get this weight off? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? How am I going to finally get thin enough? And how am I going to finally do this? And finally sort of have this magical rainbow fairy unicorn life that I associated with thinness. And I, as a result, right, I would, I was put on these sort of restrictive diets or put myself on these restrictive diets, which happened pretty early on. I think by the time I was 10 or 11, I was actively restricting on my own. It wasn't my pediatrician anymore or my parents. I was doing it all by myself. And I would never be able to stick to them. I would be so good for a week or a day, or, maybe at most a few weeks or a month, or, whatever the time frame was. The time frame fluctuated, but I'd be so good and I'd be in control and I'd be hanging on. I'd be hell yeah, this time I got it. And then something would happen and I would slip, I would fall. And when I would fall so intensely, so dramatically, right? I'd be ripping through the cabinets, just looking where, eating peanut butter out of the jar, standing up, in front of the fridge, just hoping that no one comes down and catches me, right? This was sort of the big trope that I often share about my experience with binge eating, it was this frantic mental state of, oh my gosh, how much food can I get in before I have to start my diet tomorrow? right? Like I've fallen off the wagon. I might as well just eat everything that isn't nailed down, because tomorrow I promise I'm never going to eat peanut butter ever again. Or tomorrow I promise I'm going to get back on. Day one starts tomorrow. So today I'm just going to go basically completely apeshit on my cabinets. And, this was just a pattern that followed me most of my life until I finally found recovery, which, I'll get to in a moment. But this pattern of like, okay, just get it together, just get it under control, just get your food right. Okay, just stick to your diet, just stick to the thing, whatever the magical thing is this week, just stick to it, just do it. This is going to be the thing that gets you there. And then like, again, something would happen, life would happen, an emotional trigger would happen, whatever it was would happen, or I would just crack, right? I would just crack from hunger in some instances, whatever it was. I would have a moment, I would fall, I would crack. And when I would crack, it was like, I would just like fall into this like intense depths of binge eating, basically, right? It was either, just cracking from hunger and just like, oh my gosh, I just can't stop myself, just on autopilot, just eating all the things. Or it would be, again, like falling off the wagon eating, right? Like, oh, well, I've already screwed up, so I might as well just eat everything that isn't nailed down tonight. And then tomorrow, day one, we'll start again. Right? And there were all these different, it was like a constant negotiation in my head of like, what can I eat today? What can't I eat today? Oh God, I already screwed up. Oh, you shouldn't have eaten that. Oh, wait, don't eat that. Oh, maybe don't go to dinner with so-and-so because they're going to want to eat dessert. And if you have a bite of dessert, you're going to completely lose your mind. Right. And it was just like my entire life at some point revolved around managing this crazy cycle of like, how am I going to get my weight under control? And then, of course, madly losing control and then starting again. And of course, the reality of the situation was, for me personally, my weight was just going up and up and up over time. Like I'd lose weight and I'd gain weight and I'd lose weight and I'd gain weight and I'd lose weight and I'd gain weight. But the trend over time was certainly up, not stable or down, right? The trend over time was certainly up. And it was just, I just couldn't, my life, I think the most painful part about this whole thing was just like my whole life revolved around where I was in this cycle. Was I being good? Was I being bad? Was my weight up? Was my weight down? Like that dictated my whole self-esteem. It dictated, just whether or not I was having a good day or a bad day. It was like, it was full on obsession. I mean, really, in my case, which was a little, certainly a severe case, but I think that anyone who's ever, dieted for weight loss can relate to this to some extent, maybe not as severely as I experienced it. But yeah, it was just like, this was my life. Like it was, I sometimes describe it as like the ticker tape in the back of my life. I was like, oh, I was going to school and I was doing family stuff and, this was happening, that was happening. But the ticker tape in the background all the time was food. What can I eat? What can I not eat? What should I eat? What I shouldn't eat? How much do I weigh? Right? Like that was just the ticker tape it was like the background noise to my life. And, at some point I ended up getting, again, progressively as time went on, I got more and more desperate to lose weight and more desperate to try to control my body. My attachment to thinness at all costs was just increasing and increasing and increasing. And of course, along the way, I just kept thinking, God, what the hell is wrong with me that I can't just do this? What the hell is wrong with me that I just can't stick to this? What the hell is wrong with me that I can't just make myself thin? I'm supposed to be able to just make myself thin. What the hell is wrong with me? Right? I mean, that was like sort of an undertone narrative, was what the hell is wrong with me that I can't do this? Certainly anytime I would fail, whenever I was on a new diet, I thought like, this will be it. This is the one. But certainly when things would go badly for me, when I would be in the sort of the binge eating, the rebellious phase of the cycle, the undertone was, what the hell is wrong with me? And so at some point I got so desperate to lose weight that I got really heavy into appetite suppressants. I just started doing drugs. Basically, it was weight loss at all costs. It wasn't about health. It wasn't about anything. It was about just being thin at all costs. And that ultimately ended up, thankfully, getting me into rehab. And I ended up being diagnosed for the first time in my life with binge eating disorder, which is a little bit of a misnomer, right? Because, I think binge eating disorder really is just an eating disorder in which you also happen to be binging as part of your disordered eating cycle. So I finally got treatment and I finally started to like actually think, oh, wow, like you have a dysfunctional relationship with food. Like the problem isn't that you can't control yourself. The problem isn't that you just keep breaking your diet. The problem is that like your entire life revolves around trying to be thin. Your entire life revolves around food in some capacity, right? Like you have a super disordered relationship with food and you need to deal with that, right? Like this has become something beyond just, I can't stick to my diet, right? This has become like craziness. And so, it actually, believe it or not, took me a really, really long time, even though I sort of identified, as like, as kind of as a disordered eater. And I recognized there was something like going on in my head and it wasn't just about the breaking my diet. And it wasn't just about the binging. I definitely, for many years in treatment, really was convinced that the binge eating was was like the real problem, right? And the restriction wasn't really a problem. It was really the binging that was a problem. And by buying into that narrative for so long, even in the context of treatment, which was encouraged in a lot of the treatment, sort of places that I went for treatment, and I tried so many different things to kind of quote unquote, get over this problem. I spent years trying to get over this problem after my first stint in rehab. I was still struggled for years and years trying to get over it, but I kept getting sort of conflicting messages. Like one message would be like, don't diet, don't restrict, don't diet, restrict. But then the other message would be like, but make sure you don't eat too much, but make sure you don't eat too much. Right. So it was like, felt like I was constantly straddling this weird line between like, recovering theoretically from restrictive disordered eating, but then also like make sure you don't eat too much, right? And so, that ended up being a really dysfunctional line that I was straddling for a long time, even in the context of recovery until, finally I was just like, oh my gosh, like I just can't do this anymore. Like I just can't stay obsessed with trying to control my food and my weight at all costs. Like I just don't give a shit anymore. Like I just cannot continue to care. This cannot be my life. Like my life cannot revolve around what I ate that day. And I sort of, again, this is the short version of the story. There's so many different pieces of the story that I tell the story a little differently every time I do an interview. But, at some point I just was like, I just can't do this anymore. I mean, the punchline is I just kind of surrendered. And I was just like, I just cannot spend my days obsessed with what I ate that day, worrying about, whether or not I was going to gain weight, I just can't do this anymore. This just like, at some point I was like, you know what? Fine. If I gain weight, fine. I don't give a shit. I cannot stand to think about this anymore. I just want to go live my life. I just want to have a life outside of food. I just kind of like, I really did sort of just like let go of restrictions. I was like, my food is what my food is. Like if I eat a cupcake when I'm sad, whatever. If I eat 10 cupcakes when I'm sad, whatever. Like I had this sort of deep, like very like kind of spiritual like acceptance of like whatever the hell happens with my food is what happens with my food. Like I can't be obsessed with this anymore. I can't think about this anymore. I gotta move on. Like fuck it, excuse my language, And what was so kind of like magical that I wasn't like expecting was it was like when I made that decision to just be like, my life can't revolve around this anymore. Like I can't care about this anymore. I don't have the energy to care about this anymore. It was like my food just kind of fell into place. Like it just sort of became food. Like all of a sudden, when people say, and this used to piss me off so much when people would say, what's the big deal? Just eat. It's just food. And I never got that. I would get so upset when people would say that. I'd be like, you don't understand. I have an eating disorder. You don't understand. It is a big deal, blah, blah, blah. And it was like, after this moment of like just full surrender, like full acceptance of like, you know what? Whatever I eat today is fine. It's fine. It's like when I decided it wasn't a big deal, all of a sudden it wasn't anymore. It was like all of a sudden I got what these people were talking about when they said food is just food. All of a sudden food just started being food. It stopped having this like magical, mythical power over me, right? It was just food. Like who cares, right? Like it was like all of a sudden I got that it really was just food. And if I eat 5 cupcakes, it's not the end of the world, right? Like little devils with red horns aren't going to come like bring me under. It's okay. I am like fundamentally okay, no matter what I eat, no matter what my health status is, I'm fundamentally okay. I don't need to hate myself for this, right? I don't need to spend my life obsessed with this. It really is okay. And when I had that mental clarity, like that sanity, that perspective, right? That perspective that, quote unquote normal eaters, they just take it for granted. They're running around just not giving a shit and their food just is what their food is, right? And we all, everyone with like food issues is like, how do they do that? Right? And it's like the difference between them and you, or like them and anyone who's struggling with food, right, is really just like the level of like how much you give a shit. Right? It's like how upset, how attached you are to needing your food to look a certain way, or else all hell will break loose and your life will be over and no one will love you, right? Like that tension is sort of what creates, it's the fuel that drives like binge eating and diet binge cycling and the obsession and the emotional eating and all of this stuff, right? And so it's like when I finally let go of just the mental, like when I was just finally like, you know what, whatever, man, whatever. I don't have I just don't have the energy to care about this. I just can't continue for this. This can't be my life. I give up. That was like this massive, it was like all of the sudden I could operate like all those quote unquote normal eaters who just didn't really think it was a big deal, who just didn't really care, who just ate what they wanted and didn't really think about it and moved on with their lives. It was like all of a sudden I could do that. And so, that's what ended up happening. It was like my food just became my food, I pretty much, my biological instincts are, pretty much running the show, right? It's like when I'm hungry, I was like, oh, it's time to eat. Like when I'm full, I like don't really care to keep eating typically, unless it's super good. And then in which case I do get really full and that's okay too. And I eat what I want. And the reality of the situation is because I'm not constantly like on some restrictive diet being told like, oh, don't touch that toy. You can't have that toy. I don't feel the need to grab for the toy all the time. Like I actually want a variety of different foods naturally. Like, sure, sometimes I want the cupcake, but like, a good portion of the time, probably most of the time, I actually want like balanced meals that make me feel good and allow me to like do my job and go have fun with my friends. And this is all, this ability to just sort of like eat and like quote unquote normally is completely because of a mental shift, right? Like I could never have forced myself into that in that old dieter, like crazy diet mentality that I used to live in, that used to be my life. And so now, that's what I do. Like now that's what I teach how do you actually have a mental shift? How do you actually start to think like these quote unquote normal eaters who just like eat their food and it's no big deal. And they generally make like relatively healthful choices that make their bodies feel good, but like also sometimes just eat for pleasure and that's cool too. And it's no big deal. Like, how do you actually teach that? Because it's not a diet. It's not a to-do list. It's not, a 1, 2, 3, step 5, 6, like it is a mental transformation. It is a mental mind shift change. And so, that's what I'm committed to teaching. And that's what I've been teaching pretty much ever since 8 years now. I've been teaching, how to actually think like a quote unquote normal eater, how to actually relax around food, actually how to have a healthy, normal relationship with food rather than like a crazy, insane, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. Oh my God, every bite matters. Right. Like instead of like a tense, restrained, relationship with food. How, people say love, hate, right? Like it's just this, love, hate, right? How do you move away? How do you actually not have a love, hate relationship with food and just have like it's kind of pleasurable and fun. And it's also not a big deal relationship with food.
More on my interview with Isabel, Foxen after this message from one of our podcast partners. I like to take extra precautions to support my gut during cold and flu season. The stress of daily life, work, and traveling can take a toll on anyone's immune system, and none of us have time to get sick, am I right? I like to take a strong probiotic as a way to repopulate my healthy gut bacteria, which leads to a stronger immune system. Wolf Clinic Royal Flora is my choice for soil-based probiotics. Wolf Clinic is offering 20% off their probiotics to US and Canadian listeners of the Keto Diet Podcast. Head to healthfulpursuit.com/gut and use the coupon code GUT, all in caps, no spaces, at checkout to receive 20% off. Unsure of the link? Simply check out the show notes of today's episode to get all the details. Yeah, it's so interesting because I remember the first time I heard your story like years ago while I was kind of dabbling in like, I think I'm pretty fed up with this, but I don't know how to move on with this. And very much in that same space, I had bulimia and it was just this on off thing from, bulimia back to anorexia and back again. And I remember hearing your story for the first time and being like, I just don't understand how is this even possible? And for me, it was a little bit different because it sounds like for you, it was thinness is my number one goal. And for me, initially, when I was younger, it was thinness is my number one goal. But then I masked it with, but I'm doing a healthy thing and it's all about health and healthy eating and healthy living. Do you see that a lot in your practice where women are like, yeah, but I mean, this is healthy. So what's a big deal?
So I do see it a lot. So here's my question to that. So it's like when people say, no, it's not about thinness, it's about health. Like number one, I think a lot of the times that's bullshit, right? Like a lot of people use the words health to mask a desire for thinness, right? It's like the politically correct way to say thin is healthy. Like people will say to me like, oh, that low cal thing is super healthy. And I'm like, low cal is super healthy. Like, what are you talking about? Like you're clearly trying to lose weight. Like this is about thinness. This isn't about health. This is about thinness. Or people will be confused by that because they'll be like, wait, what do you mean? Isn't thin and health? Doesn't health and thinness mean the same thing, right? I mean, for a lot of people, there's that confusion too of thinness and health meaning the same thing, which they don't, which we can talk about. I do think absolutely in the past, probably 20 to 30 years, or certainly in the past 10 years, there's also been like a legitimate increased rise in anxiety around health when it comes to food. So like quote unquote orthorexic behaviors, meaning like people who fully, truly, it's actually legitimately not about weight. They don't care about weight at all. They may even be trying to put on weight for whatever reason. But there's like an enormous amount of anxiety about eating the healthful thing, like almost in sort of like an OCD kind of a way, right? Like, oh my gosh, like if I eat something that's not healthy, I'm going to freak out. And I actually relate to that. Like that was definitely one of the behaviors on my carousel of disordered eating behaviors was like panic when I would eat something that I considered to be like quote unquote unhealthy or in my mind, it felt dangerous, right? Like I remember having this sort of like panic. I would have panic attacks about farm raised salmon. Like I read somewhere on some blog that farm raised salmon like increased your chances of some kind of cancer. Like I don't even know what I read, but I had this like just panic about farm raised salmon. Like it was a full on like, oh my gosh, like I can't eat farm raised salmon. And so, yeah, so I think that there's, it's a combination of all of those things. Like number one, I think again, a lot of people who say that they're pursuing health when they're really getting honest with themselves are also pursuing thinness, are also pursuing and specifically, not even necessarily thinness for the purpose of health, but thinness for the purpose of status, right? Like a lot of people who claim to be pursuing health, it's like health is this great rationalization for pursuing the status of thinness, right? Like the body, the I want to look good to other people and I want other people to think I'm hot. Like, like that's really, I think realistically, like 90, I would say 80% of people who say, oh, I'm just doing this for health. There's definitely a part of them that's also emotionally attached to looking a certain way. But then again, also certainly even on the health front, there is absolutely a rise, I think, with sort of the advent of the internet and like the just a proliferation of health media that sort of come about in the past, let's call it 10 to 15 years, there is also certainly a rise of like kind of like quote unquote orthorexic behaviors or just like, sort of obsession or sort of, compulsive restriction around health in a way that is arguably not very mentally healthful, and quite frankly, also in a way that is arguably dangerous to one's physical health, right? What's interesting about orthorexia or sort of obsession with health, like mental health, mental obsession with like maintaining specific diet just for health and not wanting to veer from that, is that there's sort of like a bell curve, right? Like caring about health is healthy up until to a point. And then once you hit a certain point in the bell curve and become sort of too obsessive, you actually start to run the risk of missing like major vital nutrients, right? And a lot of people who struggle with orthorexia, what they actually tend to become physically sick with are signs of malnutrition. So that's both of those are possible. But I would say, I don't think I can stress this enough. I find that 80% of people who are like, I'm just trying to be healthy, when they're really being honest with themselves, or also have some sort of attachment to their bodies looking a certain way for the outside world.
Yeah, exactly. And so you chatted a little bit about, how you educate people to kind of let that go. And you're right, it is very much a mindset. And I got to that space too of I legit don't even care anymore. And I can't care anymore because I'll probably die if I think about this for one more day. I can't continue on this path. And so for women listening I know when I first grasped this concept, even just a little bit of what you're talking about, it's terrifying because there's that you're teetering on the edge of I can't do this, but I don't understand my life without this.
Yeah.
What thoughts do you have when it comes to that? That terror, it is terror. I remember just being frozen, crying, just I can't do this, but I don't know what do I do? What does my life look like?
Well, so there's a few things. I mean, I think that the terror, is sort of an over-exaggerated terror for most people, right? In the sense that most people who are experiencing this terror have only ever experienced extreme restriction followed by binging. And in their minds, not restricting equals binging, equals out of control, binging, rebellious, get it in now, right? For a lot of people, those are the only two modes of operation that they have. Right. For dieters in particular, it's our only two modes of operation are on the wagon, off the wagon, on the wagon, off the wagon. Right. So the idea of not being on the wagon is really scary because in our minds, when we're not on the wagon, that means bad things are happening, food's out of control, it's just it's a total free for all and everything's crazy and wild. And I think that there's an image of if I didn't put myself back on the wagon after those moments, I would be Violet Beauregard from Willy Wonka. I'd be the blueberry who just grows literally until the point of explosion, right? There's this feeling of it's just never gonna end, and I have no ability, I have no satiation point. It's just I'll just eat forever and ever and ever and ever if I don't actively restrain myself. If I don't actively sit on my hands trying not to eat, I'll just eat, 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 eat. And so that's sort of, I think, how most dieters feel about it, right? I mean, that was certainly my belief for a very long time was if I let myself just quote unquote eat what I want, I would just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat forever. And I am a quote food addict and it would just never end and it would just go on and on and on. And that was my belief. Now, the reason that was my belief is because that was my experience as a dieter, as a person who was always restricting. Anytime I would let go of restrictions, that would happen. I would go on these rampant, wild binge eating episodes. And every time I would have a binge eating episode after a period of restriction, it would sort of solidify this narrative of I can't control myself. I'm a food addict, whatever the narrative was. And so this narrative of I'm not to be trusted with food, there's something wrong with me, I have a chip missing, and I need to actively sit on my hands and try not to eat, or all hell will break loose. And the reality of the situation is that's just not in alignment with biological reality. The biological reality is when we let ourselves eat what we want, at some point, our bodies actually do become full and satisfied. At some point, if we're underweight, we'll gain weight up to a point, but then at some point we'll just become a weight. We'll become our quote unquote natural weight, or what, eating disorder professionals call set point weight, which basically just means your body has a natural weight that it wants to be, that it's comfortable at. If you suppress it for too long, you're going to probably rebound and binge until you get back there. And there are absolutely, I think, what's really challenging is people will say no, I was binging for 6 months when I stopped dieting, and I think that there's a lot of reasons why that happens too. Very few people who have that story really are not dieting, right? There's also, you've probably heard me talk about this concept of emotional restriction, where I'm binging, I'm eating everything that isn't nailed down, but I'm judging myself violently for it. So I'm constantly in this state of Last Supper mode where I have, telling myself I better get this under control tomorrow. And so of course I better get it all in now. And so there's sort of all of these different, both psychological and physiological sort of things that I think dieters experience around food that create this sense of feeling totally out of control whenever I slip. But the reality of the situation is like your body does work. You do actually have biological signals that, kind of tell you like what it needs and when it needs it. And in the absence of these heavy restraints, you will at some point just get to a point where food is kind of just happening to you, right? Like your biological instincts will just work. Biological instincts typically just work on their own unless we interfere with them. So dieting would be like a heavy interference with our biological instincts, right? Like if I try to like decrease my food, if I'm trying to control my food, basically, right? If I'm trying to control my food, it's sort of like trying to control my breath, right? Like there's only so long I can do it before I'm going to start gasping for air. But the truth is when I just forget about my breath, when I don't worry about my breath just happens. It's a biological instinct. I don't need to like be told how much to breathe in, how much to breathe out. My body's just kind of doing it. Like I just am naturally inclined to breathe in the amount of oxygen that I need and breathe out the amount of oxygen that I need. And eating is actually, believe it or not, like functions pretty similarly when we stop screwing with it, when we stop, attempting to control it and trying to do the dance with food. But I think it is really scary, in the beginning. I think that there's this terrible fear that like, I'm a special snowflake. My biology is broken. There is something deeply wrong with me. You don't understand, again, blah, 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 all of this stuff of like, no, for me, I really am going to be a Violet Beauregard and I am going to be like a blueberry who just keeps growing until I literally explode to death. So yeah, I think that that's, like I always try and like sort of have my clients like take some solace in the fact that this is like, a biologically instinctive process, like animals who have no conscious thought, just eat the amount of food that's right for their bodies without even thinking about it, right? Like this literally is a biological instinct. You did this perfectly as a baby. It is your birthright to just eat naturally and normally, just, without really thinking about it. But the second we interfere, the second we try to control it, shit goes haywire, right? It's just kind of, again, like if I tried to control my breath, at some point, I'm going to start gasping for air, right? Similarly, if I try to control my food, at some point, I'm going to start, quote, gasping for food. So yeah, so I think that that's, number one thing to remember, right? Is like, you're not really probably a special snowflake. Like your body does work. You did this as a baby naturally at one point. The only reason you're not doing it now is because you're so overwhelmed with all the diet noise. You're so overwhelmed with all the body shame and the food judgment and all the craziness, right? That it's like, you can't even, you're overwhelming your natural instincts. When in reality, your natural instincts around food work pretty well on their own when you just get out of the way. So yeah, so that's sort of like number one. And I think, sometimes I do find that like a practice of intuitive eating, right? With like a practice of listening to your body and actually noticing, am I hungry? Am I full? How does my body actually feel? That can be a really helpful way to sort of get through that transitional period from, living in this land of craziness and sort of disordered eating and being scared to let go and actually getting to the point of letting go. Because in the process of learning about intuitive eating and the process of learning how to listen to our body's signals, we realize that our body's signals are there, right? We realize, oh, like I actually do have a body that works. Like I actually do have a body that like does things like become hungry and becomes full. And my relationship with food and my desires for food do shift to some extent depending on how hungry I am and how full I am. I could still want to keep eating when I'm past the point of, quote unquote, past the point of full or whatever for various different reasons. But like it's when you start to just take inventory, just start to observe how your body is feeling, which most dieters don't do at all, right? Most dieters are so practiced at just ignoring their bodies, just ignoring the fact that they actually have hunger and fullness signals, just ignoring their biological signals around food entirely, and instead are just trying to just eat what's on the meal plan or whatever. When we actually start to like just notice like, oh yeah, I actually do have like hunger signals. I actually do have biological instincts around this. That kind of, I think, can help bridge the gap of sort of realizing and recognizing, there are so many different sort of safety stops in place just naturally, right? Like you're not going to become Violet Beauregard. You're going to become a weight. that's healthful and natural and easy for you to maintain. And that's probably the weight that you're supposed to be. And that's, the weight that we do body image work around, right? Because that's the weight that really is, that's the weight that's healthy for you, is the weight that you're able to maintain easily without much effort in reality.
Yeah, such good things that you just said. And I think that birthright piece, and something that I had to remind myself of constantly, is like, I did this without effort for years before I even knew what my body, like I remember moving around when I was a kid and not caring and eating what I wanted. And my sister liked to eat all the time, whereas I liked just maybe eating once or twice a day. I was never like the snacker. But then, the diet industry told me, okay, I need to eat every 2 hours. Otherwise my metabolism will slow down. So then I'm like packing snacks and obsessing about, oh my gosh, when's my next meal? But I don't want to eat, but I have to eat. And we're made not to trust our bodies. And that comes over time. And for you, it happened really young. And for others, it's like when we're 20, 30 something, or even women that go through menopause that ate freely up until they turn 50, and all of a sudden their body is changing. And now they're told that they need to watch what they eat, because how could their body know?
And so sad.
I know, it's so sad, and something you see constantly, I'm sure. More on my interview with Isabel, Foxen Duke after this message from one of our podcast partners. I love being Canadian, the home of the true north, strong and free. But gosh, am I jealous that y'all in the US get access to Thrive Market. For all of my pals south of the border, my friends at Thrive Market are offering you $20 off your first 3 boxes of groceries, plus free shipping and a 30-day free trial. That's a total of $60 in savings, equivalent of over 3 tubs of collagen, or over 4 free pounds of cacao butter, or get this, a half year's supply of free digestive enzymes, all for switching to Thrive Market for your online grocery needs. So on top of their everyday wholesale prices, the extra $60 off your first 3 orders plus free shipping, you're going to transform a regular $100 grocery run into an $80 Thrive Market order for 3 months in a row for the same amount of things. Go to thrivemarket.com/keto to get your instant $60 off, free shipping, and a free 30-day membership. This offer is available to new Thrive Market customers only, and if you're unsure of the link, simply check out the show notes for today's episode to get all the details. So, how do we break down the whole weight equals health thing? I know it's taken me personally a couple of years to kind of get a sense of it, but can we talk a little bit more about how weight doesn't equal health and all of that?
Yes. Okay. So I think before we even get into health, I mean, like there's a lot of sort of myth busting that has to go on. So I'll start by just saying, like, just like there is diversity in skin color and height and eye color and hair color, right? Different body types are actually just biologically and metabolically just a little bit different, right? Like different shapes, different amount of muscle, different amount of like fat to muscle ratio, different all sorts of stuff, right? Our bodies are just all a little different. We're not all supposed to be like, iPhone 5s, like exactly the same printed on the factory line, right? And that's historically always been the case, right? So like even thousands and thousands of years ago, like BC, there was the there are actually, you can like dig up and you'll see like there'll be like little like caveman drawings of like women who are plumper versus women who are thinner, right? Like there've just always existed this natural body diversity. I think that there's been like there's this myth that all of a sudden like fatness above a size BMI 25 or whatever is like a new phenomenon. Like it just started to exist this century, and that's not entirely true, right? For sure, weights on average have risen over the past 100 years, probably because, less people are starving to death and there's just a greater food supply and various other reasons as well that I could go into, but they're kind of boring. But the reality of the situation is body diversity, right? Just the idea that some people might naturally be more inclined towards one body type versus another has always existed since the beginning of human history, right? We were never iPhone 5s. We were never meant to all just be the same size. We were always supposed to we always have had natural variation and diversity in size, right? And just size and shape, and bigger boobs and smaller boobs and bigger butt and smaller butt and, all the things, just natural diversity of size, right? And so, it is actually relatively recently in history that we've really started to kind of try to make everyone look the same, basically decided we see a correlation between like certain sizes and certain health statuses or like chronic health conditions. So we're just going to decide that being within a certain size range is a solid proxy for health, basically. And we're just going to encourage everyone to try and get to that size. And hopefully that'll make them have less chronic illnesses, which is not actually true. The reality of the situation is, just forcing your like square peg of a body into like the round hole that society dictates for you is probably not like the answer to chronic illnesses. And so, I'll sort of quickly explain that. Essentially, when I say the two things are correlated, right? So higher body weights tend to be correlated with certain specific kinds of chronic health conditions, for instance, like diabetes or heart disease. But that doesn't necessarily mean that being higher body shape or size causes health conditions like diabetes or heart disease. Correlation and causation are very different things statistically. So anyone who's taken a statistic class will understand what I mean. But so basically that means is like they often go together, right? They often happen at the same time, higher body weights and chronic health conditions. And again, often, not always, probably much less than you actually think, but they're correlated. They go together more often than the alternative. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they cause the same, that one causes the other. And I'll give you an example, like another great example of the difference between causation and correlation. So like people like Linda Bacon, who is the author of Health at Every Size, she says, having yellow teeth is also correlated with lung cancer. Right. So these two things often go together. If you have yellow teeth, you're more likely to have, right? If you have lung cancer, you're more likely to have yellow teeth than the alternative, right? They're correlated. They're positively correlated. When one goes up, the other tends to go up as well. And so, by this logic, right, if we decided that correlation meant that one causes the other and that one is the cause of the other, we would all be racing around whitening our teeth as a preventative measure for lung cancer. Right. When in reality, there's probably this other third party thing going on called smoking, right? Like correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. It could mean any number of things. So for the instance of, lung cancer and teeth whitening, right? Whitening your teeth probably isn't going to cure your lung cancer, even though these things are correlated, right? So same thing happens with weight and health, right? Like there's this sort of, correlation and sort of in a grand effort to just simplify medicine and just sort of reduce medicine down to the most like easy to calculate. Let's spend as little time with patients and actually getting to know them as we possibly can. And let's just fit them into boxes. We're just going to say, oh, you know what? You're just more likely to have fewer chronic health conditions if you're around this size range. So we're just going to try and tell you to go to that size range, despite the fact that that size range, A, might not be possible for you, B, might not be healthy for your particularly unique body, right? Like just because one weight is healthy for someone doesn't mean that it's healthy for another person, again, because of the sort of natural diversity that exists in body sizes, right? So this is sort of, a really big conversation, but ultimately there's a lot of problems in the way that we look at weight and health in our society, right? Certainly in our medical system. There's a lot of weight biases in our medical system that sort of are producing a lot of very, very bad, very dangerous science where, every time a person goes into a doctor's office, they're told, lose weight, lose weight, lose weight. Like it's like a full-on panacea for every type of possible chronic health condition. When in the reality of the situation is for a lot of people with chronic health conditions, losing weight's not going to do anything for them unless, there also happen those, the measures that they're taking also happen to be correlative behaviors that are improving their health condition, right? So when people are like, oh, I reversed my diabetes, and I lost 50 pounds, it's like, well, I don't know if losing 50 pounds actually like does anything about your blood sugar or reverses diabetes, but if you lost 50 pounds because you were, eating fewer carbs or, whatever it was, then yeah, that's like might be a correlative behavior that might reduce, bring down your blood sugar, right? So there's this sort of third party thing called a behavior, health behavior, that people completely overlook, right? We love to think that health and weight are the same thing, but the reality of the situation is that there's not a ton of evidence that actual loss of fat cells reduces things like heart disease or diabetes or other quote unquote weight related illnesses, much more likely what's actually making an impact on people's health is the fact that they're changing their health behaviors, right? They're balancing their blood sugar in a more effective way. They're eating more fruits and vegetables. They're moving their bodies on a regular basis, those kinds of things, which just happen to be correlated with both reduced weight and like quote unquote better health outcomes. So yeah, so that's sort of my that's a challenging, and it's a big question that you just asked me, but that's sort of my like first initial attempts at answering that question.
Yeah, it is so complicated. And I know when I started dabbling in like the whole health at every size, I really couldn't wrap my head around it because it is such a huge topic. Something that Jess Baker said in a random interview, and I was listening to it in the car driving back from the chiropractor or something. And she said, and very similar to what you just said, is like, try not to think of health at every size because it's a big topic for me. And what she said is like, it's healthy behaviors. When you surround your life with healthy behaviors, whatever size you end up being, that's your health at your size. So instead of thinking of like, right, oh my gosh, health at every size, that's huge. Jess was like, it's just about healthy behaviors. And what's interesting is like everyone's healthy behaviors is different. Like I know that I need to practice yoga every day in order to feel just good and balanced and grounded. And that's a healthy behavior that I have, but it's not like I have to practice yoga every day. Otherwise I'm not a worthy human, which is the story I used to tell myself. So even though you're doing the same things, it's a different relationship with it. Would you agree that it's like, if it's too big of a concept, because it is very huge, just focusing on behaviors that make you feel good, make you, in that headspace to make it manageable for people?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, ultimately my perspective on health is pursue healthful behaviors. Again, like I think what Jess said is like thought on, right? Like whatever body size you end up at when you are pursuing healthful behaviors, or when you're, when you have a healthy relationship with food and a healthy relationship with exercise, whatever that looks like for you, whatever size you end up at when you are healthy, when you're actually doing healthy things on a regular basis and taking care of your body is the size that's right for you by definition. And that size could be different for different people, and it will be different for different people, right? Some people are super healthful at all, really various different weights, at all sorts of different weights, including weights that would be considered are called fat, right? Or that the doctor would say are unhealthy weights. They're actually really healthy people at quote unquote unhealthy weights who are like running and eating vegetables and moving their bodies and doing all sorts of things. And they're in great health, right? All their vitals are awesome. They live a nice, long, healthy life. And they just happen to be genetically designed to be a little bit bigger. And that's, that just sort of is what that is, right? On the flip side, right? You could be a thin person and not taking care of yourself at all and suffer from, various health consequences, not moving, not eating vegetables, not like taking care of your blood sugar, and you just happen to be a genetically thin person. That doesn't necessarily make you healthier than anyone else. It just means that you're genetically designed to be thin. But if you're not taking care of yourself, it just doesn't matter. So yeah, so I think that that's like spot on. And yeah, and I agree, at the end of the day, health is a spectrum, right? Like I think, again, it's very easy to get caught up in just your health behaviors being what dictates your self-esteem, right? It's very easy to get caught up in like, I have to do XYZ health behaviors, or like, all hell is going to break loose. And that actually leads to a lot of dysfunction. It leads to a lot of anxiety. It leads to a lot of just like mental health problems, so for me, the way that I like to think about it is like, if your health doesn't include your mental health, we have a problem, right? Like health is a holistic term in my definition, right? It must include mental health, right? If my pursuit of physical health is disrupting my mental health, what's the point?
Yeah, 0 point.
0 point. Yeah, 0 point. Like if I have to be a complete crazy lunatic, like anxious wreck all of the time to be quote physically healthy, what is the point? Like the whole point of having physical health is to enhance my quality of life, right? To have less pain, to have more energy, to be basically to support me in my pursuit of happiness, right? Because my days are numbered no matter what, right? So I want to make my time on this earth count. Right. And so, for me, like, obsessing about how I can live 1 year longer, what is realistically 1 year longer, or even 10 years longer, but spending my whole life obsessed with how I'm going to live those extra 10 years longer is like a waste of the other 70 years. It's like, what is the point? So, this is all, in my opinion, it's like the pursuit of health is all about like living like happy, joyous, free life, right? If your pursuit of health is getting in the way of you living a happy, joyous, free life, that's something that you got to look at in yourself, just like for your emotional and mental health around it.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you mentioned also, the years that go by. And if you're constantly obsessing about it, that reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever done it, but that future self meditation where you speak to yourself in the future. And I did that meditation years ago when I was starting this work. And that lady did not care about a lot of things. And her life was so much more fulfilling. And she was doing art and, hiking and living in the forest and all these things. And I said, yes, that is the life that I want.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people get stuck up on like, okay, so now that I'm not in this space, like, what do I do instead? And I think a lot of people think, well, then I just won't be crazy around food. But I'm sure you've seen in your practice that women go on to do pretty crazy things after they no longer care about this, wouldn't you?
I mean, you free up so much brain space, right? I mean, it's like all of a sudden the world is your oyster, right? Like I used to make the joke, if I spent half the time that I used to spend trying to figure out how I was going to make myself thinner, if I spent half that time, like, putting that time towards like a humanitarian pursuit, I would have a Nobel Peace Prize. Like that's the amount of energy and the amount of time that I used to spend on trying to become thin. Imagine what would happen, what my life would be like if I put half of that time towards something like actually useful and productive in the world, right? It's something that really like matters in the world. Even if that thing that matters is just like my family, my friendships, my like just like pursuing like a big, bold, beautiful, rich life, right? Being here, enjoying this life, right? Like it's just such a waste of time, especially, I mean, again, it's like dieting doesn't typically make people thinner long-term. Dieting just makes people weight cycle up and down, up and down, up and down. For 95% of people, that is the reality. Most people do not just like lose weight and keep it off and have a happy ending. Most people are just jumping on the diet binge cycling like wagon, like diet binge cycling like hamster wheel. That's the vast majority of people's reality when it comes to dieting. And this is like very well documented in evidence. There's like kind of no way around this reality. And so like if you were just like, okay, this is ridiculous. Like this is not worth my energy, right? Like if I could think about all the energy and time I'm putting into just running on this hamster wheel that ultimately is getting me nowhere. What if I had just spent all of those years and all that elbow grease and all of that mental energy, like just doing something fun or doing something like purposeful in the world or mission oriented or anything. It's like, when you let go of this obsession with weight, it's like all of a sudden you have your whole life. It's like it is like the most incredible like freeing up of your calendar that you could possibly imagine. I think my clients go on to do like amazing things. I mean, I'll just speak for myself personally. Like there is no way I could run the business that I run if I was still dieting, right? Like there is no way that I could do like, just like, have the relationships that I have if I was still dieting, right? I just, I feel like I'm so grateful. I'm so lucky. I mean, it's just like incredibly like, like just like healthy, awesome relationship right now. And primary relationship right now. And it's just like, I can't even imagine like, beginning this relationship with this person if I was like, just like, oh my gosh, please don't look at my stomach. I have to wear a t-shirt during sex because I hate my body so much. Like, it's just that kind of stuff. So I think that this, it is really amazing. Like, what life has to offer you when you let this go, right? Like it's probably not going to turn into the giant disaster that you think. The reality of the situation is like, you're not really probably like succeeding at this weight loss goal to begin with. Like most people out there are not most people out there are not succeeding at some like grand weight suppression tactic. Most people, again, are just diet binge cycling and just like wasting a bunch of time and making themselves miserable for no good reason. And in the meantime, it's like, okay, on the other side, if you just let that go and just decided to like kind of accept your body for what it is and get cool with yourself for who you are, on the other side is this thing called all the time that you could possibly ever want. On the other side is this thing called, you can like, it's like the world is your oyster. Like everything you ever wanted, everything, I often think to people, or I often talk about, women are constantly waiting on the wait. Like, I'm sure you've heard this before. Like, when I'm thin, I'll buy the new dress. When I'm thin, I'll go on vacation and wear the bikini and like take the trip to Mexico. When I'm thin, I'll go on a Tinder date. When I'm thin, whatever will happen, right? It's like this magical, fantastical thing will happen when I'm thin. If you just got rid of the when I'm thin, you could do it now. You could actually have your life now. Nothing's stopping you except yourself. So yeah, that's kind of, a big deal, is like getting your life back.
Yeah, it's totally a big deal. I know that when I first started thinking about this and I was going through desire mapping, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the desire map stuff.
Yes.
Basically, like, my core desired feelings are, freedom, spontaneity, and not being tied down and just being free. But I was always so scared of that. And, my husband and I recently sold everything we owned, like everything. We have 0 things, and we renovated an RV and we live in it now and we travel everywhere. And I would not like to just think of having this life being so diet focused. I mean, there are weeks where we are eating out at restaurants constantly because there aren't a lot of options, or we're traveling, or, there's no Whole Foods nearby and I can't get the specific foods that I want. And to just be constantly planning that stuff, I mean, I would be insane at this point had I continued down that life. So it's just interesting to see how, when you allow yourself that space by not filling it up with must create snacks and food and what am I eating tomorrow and my meal plan and how does that relate to my training and just that constant franticness, your life kind of just unfolds. Like, I didn't plan this. It kind of just happened. We were looking at RVs and we're like, could we live in this? Oh my gosh, we should sell everything and live in this, to even have those dreams. And like you said, it's like the time is now, your life is now, and you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And I think that was really my turning point of like, I can't have this life and I don't care what it costs. I need to see where this path goes. And what's the worst thing that can happen? I gain weight. And, that weight gain to me was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm so much more stronger and more confident and all those, like, it doesn't even matter anymore. So I'm so happy that you shared all of this today. And where can people find more from you?
Oh, yeah. Well, so, if any of this has made sense to any of you, if you're like, oh my gosh, I really do struggle with my relationship with food and I need help. My website, I have like a video training series. That's like an introduction to my work. That's like how 85% of people find me is through stopfightingfood.com. So stopfightingfood.com is like, it's just my video. It's like a free introductory video series to like all of these concepts. So it's a great way to kind of tiptoe even if you're feeling scared or nervous or like, what does she mean? Don't diet. You can kind of put your toe into the world of not dieting with the Stop Fighting Food video training series, see how it feels. Or my website, isabelfoxenduke.com. My blog is also, a great place to go. It kind of reads like a book, my blog is a great place to just sort of learn kind of get the ropes of these kinds of concepts, the psychological principles, the intuitive eating stuff, all sorts of stuff. It's definitely where, again, a good portion of people also find me on my blog. So, and it's really like kind of fun and easy to read. So I would definitely pop over there to sign up for emails. You'll get new blog posts like once a week. They're really awesome. And just, try to be super helpful and help people just relax. And again, make that mental shift into quote unquote normal eating.
Yes, I totally agree. Your video training series is awesome. I'm part of your newsletter list. So I'll include all of those links in the show notes for today's episode, which you guys can find at healthfulpursuit.com/podcast/E73. And thanks again so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that does it for another episode of the Keto Diet Podcast. Thanks for listening in. You can follow me on Instagram by searching Healthful Pursuit, where you'll find daily keto eats and other fun things. And check out all of my keto supportive programs, bundles, guides, and other cool things over at healthfulpursuit.com/shop. And I'll see you next Sunday. Bye.